I am Ratikanta Behera from Bhadrak, Odisha. First of all, I welcome all of you to my channel, The Ratik Creation, and I also ardently request you to subscribe my channel and like my video. Hello students, today we shall discuss on relative clause, a grammar topic which is in your textbook. So what the relative clause is about? The relative clause starts with a relative pronoun, and for persons, in case of subject, we may use the relative pronoun who and that. For object, we may use whom, that and who, and for possessive case we may use whose. For things, and in case of subject we may use which and that, and in case of object we may use which, that, and in case of possessive we may use whose or of which. Those are the relative pronouns which are used before the relative clause. That's why it is called the relative clause. It is also otherwise known as the adjective clause, because the relative clause works here as an adjective. And now the question is, what is the function of the adjective? The function of the adjective is to modify the main or the noun or the antecedent and gives extra information about it. Now, the relative clause, you know very well, works as an adjective clause, and it starts with the relative pronoun. The relative pronoun, I repeat again, the relative pronoun comes after the noun, and it relates the noun with the rest of the parts. Now the question is, how can we frame a relative clause? You come to the two sentences. The sentences like, the man is a corona patient, and the second sentence is, the man suffers from fever. The two sentences can be framed as a relative clause, or you may be asked to join the two sentences with a relative clause. Now, what you should do? First of all, you should do the identical noun phrase of the two sentences. The identical noun phrase of the two sentences, in the first sentence, the identical noun phrase is the man, and in the second sentence is also the man. So first of all, we must find out or pick the identical noun phrase, that is the man. Then what is our duty? We must use a proper relative pronoun for the noun or the noun phrase the man. The proper relative pronoun is who. Then we wrote who. And next, what is the function? We must put the entire relative clause after the relative pronoun who. Here, suffers from fever. And then we have to write the entire part of the first sentence which is left, that is a corona patient. Now, the sentence is a relative clause. Now, the sentence is a complex sentence, and the man who suffers from fever is a corona patient. Is a complex sentence, and the principal clause is, the man is a corona patient, and The subordinate clause is who suffers from fever, which is the relative clause here. You must be sure that this is the relative clause, and this relative clause relates the noun phrase, the main, or the antecedent, the main, and just after the antecedent there is the relative pronoun, and there is the rest part of the relative clause, and then the part of the main clause. Next come to the point, the types of relative clause. The relative clause are divided in two parts. The first one is the defined relative clause. Before we going to know the defined relative clause, we must come to the sentence or the example I have given you. You see the sentence, the students who do not labor or read regularly may fail in the examinations. This is a complex sentence, and the main clause or the principal clause is the students may fail in the examination, and here who do not read or labor regularly is the relative clause, and this is the defined relative clause. You must be clear here why it is called the defined relative clause. You see the students here the antecedent, and these students are identified here, defined here, or restricted here. The speaker gives the stress on the students who do not labor regularly. The speaker does not give focus on all the students. So the speaker limits, identifies, restricts the students only those who labor hard. So there is a limitation. The speaker has given a limitation. The students, the noun phrase are defined here, restricted here. The speaker is talking about the students who do not read regularly. Or I may cite another example. The hero who has committed suicide is Sushant Singh Rajput. Here, the hero is Sushant Singh Rajput is the principal clause. Who committed suicide is the relative clause. When I cite the example, I limited that who committed suicide is no one except Sushant Singh Rajput. Likewise, the speaker here limited or identified or restricted the students, those who are only not reading regularly. So the speaker has limited or restricted or defined or even identified only the students who do not read regularly. Here the speaker does not put any focus on the students, those who read regularly. Rather, the speaker says only the students who do not labor regularly may fail in the examination. Are you clear? That's why it is called defined relative clause. Identified, the students are identified. Limited, the limit, a limitation is given here, only the students who do not labor regularly may fail. The speaker is not giving importance or talking about or telling about the students who read regularly. Rather, the speaker says the students may fail who are not reading regularly. So those who are not reading regularly is identified. That is the student's noun phrase. And here you see the defined relative clause is not separated by a comma. That is more important thing that you should remember. The next one is non-defined relative clause. So why it is called non-defined relative clause? We must go to the point or example first. If I say Ratikanta Behera, who teaches you, is a poet. You see, who teaches you is separated from the other principal clause by a comma. And this is a complex sentence. The sentence is like Ratikanta Behera, who teaches you, is a poet. This is a complex sentence. And the main clause is Ratikanta Behera is a poet. And the relative clause is who teaches you. This is the non-defined relative clause. Another example I may cite, the pen which is laying in the table is mine. Which is laying in the table is within the comma. And the principal clause is the pen is mine. The question is here, why this one is called non-defined relative clause? You see, the antecedent, the noun phrase, the noun Ratikanta Behera is here already defined, which needs no definition, which needs no identification. The noun phrase Ratikanta is already identified here. Here is no restriction is put. And here you be sure the relative clause can be dropped. And if the relative clause who teaches you is dropped, it is still grammatical. It makes a sense. It simply means if you drop the relative clause who teaches you may not hamper the meaning or sense of the entire clause. It simply means here who teaches you is a non-essential part of the clause. But in case of defined relative clause, you can never drop the relative clause who do not labor regularly. If you drop whom you helped yesterday, then the clause will be meaningless, will not make any sense. Okay, the boy whom you helped yesterday, the boy is my student. Who is boy? Which boy is my student? Now, to whom you helped yesterday. So, to whom you helped yesterday is the essential part of the defined relative clause that can never be dropped. Okay. Next, important another discussion which is in your topic is the zero relatives. What is the zero relatives? Zero relative means the relative pronoun is optional here, and we may drop the relative pronoun without any loss of the meaning to this sentence. For example, you take this sentence, I have read the book that my father bought. This is a complex sentence, and that my father bought is the relative clause, and I have read the book is the principal clause. Again, another sentence or example, the book that I am reading is a novel. The book is a novel is the principal clause. That I am reading is the relative clause. But this relative clause is thus this relative pronoun in case of first sentence that can be dropped, and in the second sentence that can be dropped. Why it to be dropped? It can be dropped because it is the relative pronoun here works as an object of the relative clause. You see, I have read the book. So the book is your object. And in case of second sentence, if you divide the two sentences, if you separate the two sentences, I have read the book, that my father, but in case of first sentence, the book is the object. And in case of second sentence, my father is the subject and that is the object. So in case of this sentence, the relative pronoun that can be dropped or which can be contracted or otherwise known as, this is the case of zero relatives. Okay, so why is the zero? When the relative clause will be zero relatives? I repeat again, when the relative pronoun of the relative clause here that works as an object of the relative clause, there the use of the relative pronoun is optional. It has no importance or the importance is zeroed. That's why it is called the zero relatives. Yes, thanks students. You have heard me with a lot of patience. Many thanks to you.